On my son's 35th birthday, my daughter-in-law screamed at me in front of 100 guests, "Get out of here and go get lunch ready, you useless old woman." I just obeyed. As I was serving myself, she knocked my plate to the floor and forced me to clean it up. I had set aside $40,000 to give her as a gift. Instead, I handed her an envelope with a photo inside that made her faint. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 60 years old. I never thought that at this age I'd be standing in the middle of my own kitchen, cleaning food off the floor, while 100 guests watched me through the open dining room door. The plate had shattered against the tiles with a crash that cut through all the party chatter. It had all started as a normal celebration. It was my son Daniel's 35th birthday, and just like every year, his wife Chloe had insisted on throwing a huge party. Of course, I was the one who cooked, cleaned, and prepared everything while she floated around like the perfect hostess, accepting compliments for a spotless house and delicious food she had never touched. That morning, I had gotten up at 5 a.m. to start the prep. The roast turkey, the side dishes, the homemade desserts I knew Daniel had loved since he was a boy. My arthritic hands ached after 3 hours of peeling potatoes and chopping vegetables, but I didn't mind. It was for my son, for the family. Chloe appeared in the kitchen around noon, impeccably dressed in a white outfit that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. She watched me working by the stove and twisted her mouth into that look of disgust I knew so well. "Rebecca, I hope you didn't put too much salt on the meat like last time," she said without even a hello. "My friends are used to fine dining." I swallowed hard and nodded. I had been living with them for 5 years, ever since my husband passed away, and I had learned that talking back only made things worse. Daniel worked so much that he rarely saw these little interactions between Chloe and me. To him, his wife was an angel who had generously agreed to let his mother live in their house. The guests started arriving at 2 in the afternoon. I stayed in the kitchen, plating the dishes while Chloe greeted everyone in the living room. I could hear her crystal-clear laugh, her charming comments, the way everyone congratulated her on her wonderful hospitality. "Daniel is so lucky to have you," I heard Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, say to her. Not every wife would go to so much trouble to throw such an elegant party. Chloe accepted the compliments with false modesty, knowing full well that I was back there, sweating over the hot stove while she shone in the spotlight. When it was finally time to eat, Chloe walked into the kitchen with that cold smile she reserved especially for me. "Rebecca, I want you to serve dinner," she said, but there was something different in her tone, harsher, crueler. "And please, wear the apron. We don't want the guests thinking you're one of them." My cheeks burned with shame. The apron was one thing, but the way she said it, as if I were a servant instead of the woman who owned the house where I'd raised my son, cut me like a knife. I served plate after plate, carrying heavy trays that made my back ache. The guests ate and chatted happily while I went back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room. Some smiled at me politely. Others simply ignored me as if I were part of the furniture. When I was finally able to sit down with my own plate, Chloe came up behind me. She had been drinking wine all afternoon, and her voice had that dangerous edge it got when she'd had too much. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked loudly, loud enough for several guests to turn and look. I'm eating," I mumbled, confused. "Eating? Here? With the guests?" Her voice rose another notch. "Rebecca, please, you know your place is in the kitchen." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the eyes of everyone at the table on me. My heart started pounding so hard I thought they could all hear it. "Chloe, I started, but she cut me off. "Get up," she yelled. "Go to the kitchen where you belong, you useless old woman." The words hit me like a physical slap. Useless old woman. In front of 100 people I'd known for years, people from my church, neighbors, Daniel's friends, all looking at me with a mix of shock and pity that made me want to disappear. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. I didn't say anything because I couldn't. My throat was tight, and my eyes burned with tears I refused to shed in front of them all. But Chloe wasn't finished. As I walked past her carrying my plate, she stuck her foot out. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, calculated, cruel. I tripped, and my plate flew through the air, crashing onto the kitchen floor in an explosion of food and broken porcelain. "Look what you did," she shrieked, acting as if it were my fault. "Clean up that mess immediately." I knelt on the cold floor, picking up the porcelain shards with trembling hands. The food was everywhere: mashed potatoes, gravy, pieces of turkey. All my morning's work reduced to garbage on the floor. But as I cleaned, something inside me changed. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet and cold, like ice forming on a window in winter. As my knees ached against the tiles and Chloe continued to shout orders at me from above, I made a decision. I had endured 5 years of this, 5 years of small and large humiliations, 5 years of being treated like a burden in the house where I had raised my son, 5 years of watching Chloe manipulate Daniel, spend his money, and turn my home into her personal kingdom. I finished cleaning in silence. The guests had gone back to their conversations, though I could feel their occasional pitying glances. By the time I got up from the floor, Chloe had returned to the living room, laughing as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had happened. Something had changed forever in that kitchen, among the broken pieces of porcelain and wasted food. That night, after all the guests had left and Chloe had gone to bed, pleased with her performance, I lay awake in my small room. In my desk drawer was an envelope I had been saving for weeks. An envelope containing $40,000 in cash, money I had saved for years to give to Chloe as a gift. But now I had other plans for that money, plans Chloe would never see coming. The $40,000 had been my secret for 3 years. Every month, when my pension check arrived, I set aside what I could, $20 here, $50 there, sometimes more when I managed to save on medication or when Daniel gave me extra cash without Chloe knowing. It had been my plan to give that money to Chloe for their upcoming wedding anniversary, thinking that maybe, just maybe, it would make her treat me better. How foolish I had been. The morning after the party, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. As I made coffee in the silent kitchen, I took the envelope from its hiding place behind the spice jars. $40,000 in $100 bills, carefully counted and saved. Money Chloe would never know existed. But there was another envelope, too, a smaller one I had been secretly preparing for the last 6 weeks. This one didn't contain money. It contained something much more valuable, the truth. It had all started 2 months ago, when I'd gone to the grocery store and seen Chloe coming out of a downtown hotel with a man who was definitely not my son. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. I'm 60 after all, and my eyesight isn't what it used to be. But when I saw them hug and kiss passionately next to the man's red sports car, I knew I hadn't been mistaken. Mark. I recognized him immediately. He was Daniel's best friend from college, the best man at his wedding, the man who ate at our table every Friday night, the man who hugged my son like a brother while sleeping with his wife in the afternoons. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake wondering what to do. Should I tell Daniel? But I knew my daughter-in-law well enough to know she would deny everything. She was a master of manipulation, an expert at making others doubt their own reality. So I decided to wait and watch and document. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. I noticed Chloe went out shopping every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, always in a hurry, always a little too dressed up for simple errands. I noticed Mark visited our house more often when Daniel wasn't there, always with some excuse about dropping something off or picking something up. One afternoon, while Chloe was in the shower after one of her shopping trips, I checked her phone. I know it was wrong, but after years of humiliation, my conscience had developed some convenient cracks. The messages I found made me sick to my stomach. They not only confirmed the affair, but revealed that they had been laughing at Daniel behind his back. Chloe wrote to Mark about what a fool her husband was, how easy he was to manipulate, how he would never suspect a thing because he trusted her too much. "He's like a little puppy," Chloe had written. "He does whatever I say, and he gives me everything I want. Meanwhile, you and I can have all the fun we want." Mark's reply was just as despicable. "Poor Daniel, always too good for his own good. At least his money is paying for these romantic getaways." I read those messages, trembling with rage. They weren't just betraying my son. They were spending his money on their affair. Daniel worked 60 hours a week to maintain the lifestyle Chloe demanded, and she used that money to fund her infidelity. But there was more, so much more. Scrolling back through the messages, I discovered the affair had been going on for over 2 years. 2 full years of lies, betrayal, and laughing at my son's expense. And worst of all, they had been planning to divorce once Chloe could secure a large sum in the settlement. "I just need a couple more years," Chloe had written. "When I divorce him, I'll get half of everything, the house, the savings, the investments. Then we can be together officially with enough money to live comfortably." Mark had replied, "And what about the old lady, Rebecca?" "She'll be the first to go," was Chloe's response. "Daniel will stick her in some cheap nursing home somewhere. I'll finally have my house all to myself." A cheap nursing home. After raising Daniel from a baby, after taking care of the house for 5 years while they lived their perfect life, Chloe had already decided my fate. A cheap place where they would leave me to die slowly while she enjoyed the fortune my son had built. That night, with shaking hands, I started taking screenshots of everything. Every message, every photo, every sordid detail of their betrayal. I also began to follow them discreetly, documenting their meetings with photos taken from a distance. In 3 weeks, I had gathered enough evidence to destroy the perfect life Chloe had built on lies. But I knew I had to be strategic. I couldn't just show everything to Daniel at once. Chloe was too skilled at manipulating situations. I needed the perfect moment. The perfect moment came the morning after the party, when Chloe came down for breakfast with that satisfied smirk she'd been wearing since the night before. "Good morning, Rebecca," she said with false sweetness. "I hope you learned your lesson from last night. We don't want any more embarrassing scenes, do we?" I stared at her as I prepared her coffee exactly how she liked it. 2 spoonfuls of sugar, a splash of cream, just as I had done every morning for 5 years. "By the way," she continued, sitting at the table and admiring her perfectly manicured nails, "Mark is coming for lunch today. Daniel is in that important meeting until late, so make something special. You know how much Mark appreciates a good home-cooked meal." The irony was so thick I could almost cut it with a knife. Mark, coming to have lunch at Daniel's table while my son worked to support the woman who was betraying them both. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll prepare something very special." Chloe smiled, satisfied with my apparent submission. She had no idea that in my desk drawer, next to the envelope with $40,000, was another envelope. An envelope containing a single photograph that would turn her world upside down. A photograph I had taken the week before when I followed them to their favorite hotel. A clear, sharp, undeniable image of Chloe and Mark in a position that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. But that photo was just the beginning. What Chloe didn't know was that I also had evidence of something much worse, something that would not only destroy her marriage, but could destroy her entire life. As I watched her drink her coffee, carefree and arrogant, I savored the moment. Very soon, that smile would be wiped off her face forever. The truth had started to unravel 3 weeks earlier when I hired Samuel Jones, a private investigator who worked out of a small office above the downtown bakery. It wasn't a decision I took lightly. The $500 I paid him represented almost 2 months of my personal savings, but I knew I needed professional help. Samuel was a man in his 50s, discreet and efficient. When I showed him the first photos I had taken of Chloe and Mark, he nodded with the expression of someone who had seen this story too many times before. "Mrs. Miller," he had said, "I understand your situation, but you need to know that this goes deeper than you imagine." I didn't understand what he meant until he came back a week later with a file that changed everything I thought I knew about Chloe. My daughter-in-law's real name wasn't Chloe, as she had told us when she married Daniel. Her real name was Karen Vance, and she had a past she had carefully hidden for 7 years of marriage. "Your daughter-in-law was arrested in Nevada 10 years ago for marriage fraud," Samuel explained, showing me official documents. "She married 3 different men over a 2-year period, draining their bank accounts before disappearing." My hands trembled as I read the police reports. There were photos of Chloe, younger but unmistakably her, along with her aliases, Karen Vance, Sophia Miller, Isabella Roberts. Each identity had been carefully constructed to trap successful, lonely men. "How is that possible?" I whispered. "Daniel did a background check on her before they got married. He's very careful about these things." Samuel smiled sadly. "Your daughter-in-law is a professional, ma'am. The documents your son saw were forged. Birth certificates, university degrees, work references, all fabricated by a network that specializes in creating clean identities for scammers." The file contained much more. Chloe had been legally married to a man named Robert Smith in Las Vegas when she married Daniel. Technically, her marriage to my son was void, but there was something even worse. "There's more," Samuel continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your daughter-in-law didn't work alone in Nevada. Her main accomplice was a man named Mark." The world stopped around me. Mark, Daniel's best friend, the best man at their wedding, the man who had been eating at our table for 7 years while planning to destroy my son from the inside. Mark and Karen worked together, conning 3 different victims, Samuel explained. The pattern was always the same. She would marry the target, he would become a close friend to gain their trust, and together they would empty the accounts before disappearing. "Why didn't they disappear after scamming Daniel?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. "Because Daniel turned out to be more valuable than they expected," Samuel replied. "Your son built a considerable fortune over these years. Instead of stealing a fixed amount and running, they decided to stay and milk the cow for as long as possible." He showed me more documents, bank records showing regular transfers from Daniel's accounts to offshore accounts controlled by Chloe and Mark. For 7 years, they had been systematically stealing small amounts that Daniel would never notice. $500 here, $1,000 there. "In total," Samuel said, "we estimate they have stolen approximately $250,000 over the course of the marriage. $250,000. The money Daniel had worked so hard to earn, money he believed was securing his family's future, had been flowing directly into the accounts of his 2 closest predators. But the worst was yet to come. "There's one more thing, Mrs. Miller," Samuel said, hesitating for the first time. "Something I found while investigating Karen's past." He handed me a separate folder. Inside were newspaper clippings from 12 years ago, from a small town in Arizona. The headline sent a chill down my spine. "Young woman disappears after confronting scammers." The victim's name was Eleanor Vance, a 26-year-old teacher who had discovered that her fiancé was scamming her along with his best friend. Eleanor had threatened to go to the police. 3 days later, she disappeared. Her body was never found. "Are you suggesting that Chloe—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm not suggesting anything," Samuel said carefully. "But Karen Vance and Mark were in Arizona at that time, using other names, and Eleanor Vance had uncovered their scheme exactly as you have." I felt the air leave my lungs. Not only was Chloe a professional con artist, but she was potentially something much worse, and I was living under the same roof with her, knowing her secrets. "What do you recommend I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Samuel closed the folder slowly. "Be very, very careful, Mrs. Miller. People like Karen don't hesitate to do whatever is necessary to protect their secrets. If she suspects you know something—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood perfectly. That evening, I returned home with the file hidden in my grocery bag. Chloe was in the living room watching TV, laughing at some romantic comedy. She seemed so normal, so innocent. But now when I looked at her, I saw the predator she really was. "How was your day, Rebecca?" she asked without turning to look at me. "I hope you didn't spend too much at the grocery store. You know Daniel worries about expenses." The irony was nauseating. Chloe, who had stolen $250,000, scolding me for spending money on food. "It was a normal day," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Nothing special." But as I went up to my room, I knew that everything had changed. On my desk, next to the envelope with $40,000 and the photograph of Chloe with Mark, I now had something much more powerful, the complete evidence of who Karen Vance really was. Daniel would be home in 2 hours. Chloe would be waiting for him with her perfect smile and her Judas kiss. Mark would come for dinner on Friday, as always, playing the part of the loyal best friend. But this time would be different. This time, I would have the chance to expose the two predators who had been feeding on my family for years. I just had to find the perfect moment. And that moment came sooner than I expected. The next day, Chloe announced that she wanted to host a special dinner party to celebrate Daniel's promotion at work. "An intimate dinner," she said, "just for close family and a few special friends." "I'll invite Mark, of course," she said casually, "and maybe a few of my friends from the tennis club. It will be a perfect night." As I listened to her plan her next performance, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Chloe was right about one thing. It would be a perfect night. But not in the way she expected. The envelope with the photograph of her and Mark was still waiting in my drawer, but I now knew that a simple photo of infidelity wouldn't be enough. I had evidence of something far more devastating, and when the time was right, I would deliver all of it. The special dinner was scheduled for Saturday night. Chloe had spent the entire week organizing every detail with the precision of a general preparing for battle. She invited 12 people. Mark, of course, some friends from her tennis club, 2 neighboring couples, and Daniel's work partners she considered important for his career. As always, I was invisible in her plans, except as the unofficial cook. For 3 days, she had me preparing appetizers, testing recipes, and making sure everything was perfect for her big night. "Rebecca, I want tonight to be flawless," she told me on Friday morning as she reviewed the guest list for the 10th time. Daniel deserves for us to celebrate his success properly. Daniel's success. The irony ached in my chest. My son had worked 16-hour days for months to get that promotion, sacrificing time with friends, hobbies, even me, all to give Chloe the lifestyle she demanded, not knowing she had been systematically stealing from him for 7 years. That afternoon, while Chloe was out for her weekly spa treatment, which I now knew was her time with Mark, I called Samuel Jones. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" he asked. "Once you open that Pandora's box, you can't close it." "I'm sure," I replied, surprised at the firmness in my own voice. My son deserves to know the truth. "All right, I've mailed you all the additional documentation you requested. It should arrive this afternoon. And Mrs. Miller, be careful. Karen is unpredictable when she feels cornered." The package arrived at 4 o'clock. Inside were certified copies of everything. The police reports from Nevada, the marriage records showing Chloe was still legally married to Robert Smith, the bank records of the transfers, and even information about Eleanor Vance and her disappearance. There was also something I hadn't expected, photos of Chloe and Mark taken that very afternoon at the downtown hotel. Samuel had followed my request to get fresh evidence they couldn't deny or explain away. As I organized all the documents in chronological order, a strange calm settled over me. After years of feeling powerless, I finally had control over something. The truth was my weapon, and it was razor sharp. The guests started arriving at 7. Chloe was radiant in a blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She greeted each person with effusive hugs and that musical laugh she used when she wanted to impress. Daniel got home from work just in time, still in his suit, visibly tired, but smiling at the effort Chloe had made to celebrate him. My heart broke, seeing the genuine gratitude in his eyes as he kissed her on the cheek. "Thanks for organizing all this, honey," he said. "I know how much work it took." "Anything for you, my love," Chloe replied, with that sweet voice she had perfected over years of deceit. Mark was the last to arrive, of course. He walked in with that confident smile he had cultivated over years of betrayal, hugging Daniel like the brother he pretended to be. "Congratulations, buddy," he boomed, clapping him on the back with false enthusiasm. "You completely deserve it." "Yes, you do," I thought bitterly. "You deserve to know that your best friend has been betraying you for years." The dinner proceeded like all of Chloe's dinners, perfectly choreographed, filled with shallow conversation and forced laughter. I served each course in silence, invisible as always, watching the performance from the shadows. During dessert, Chloe stood up with her wine glass in hand. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her voice projecting across the dining room. "To my wonderful husband Daniel, who worked so hard to give us this beautiful life, and to our dear friends, especially Mark, who has been like a brother to us all these years." Everyone raised their glasses. Mark smiled and winked at Chloe in a way only I noticed. Daniel beamed with pride, having no idea he was toasting his own betrayal. "And of course," Chloe continued, her gaze finding mine from the kitchen, "to family, to those who understand their place and their role in our lives." That was the last straw. Their place and their role. As if I were an employee, instead of the mother who had raised the man who supported her. I slowly took off my apron and walked into the dining room. Everyone looked at me in surprise. I never interrupted Chloe's dinners. "Chloe," I said, my voice calm but clear, "I think there's something you should see." Her smile faltered for a moment. "Rebecca, we're in the middle of a celebration. Whatever it is can wait." "No," I replied, pulling the envelope from my apron pocket. "This can't wait." The silence in the dining room was palpable. Daniel looked at me, confused, while Mark had gone noticeably pale. "What is that?" Chloe asked, but there was something in her voice that suggested she already knew. It's a gift, I said, holding the envelope out to her. Similar to the one I had planned to give you. $40,000 I had saved for years, thinking maybe it would earn me your respect. Chloe blinked, clearly thrown off by the change in my demeanor. But after Daniel's birthday party last week, I continued, I decided you deserved something different, something more fitting. With trembling hands, Chloe took the envelope. The room was so quiet I could hear the paper crinkling as she opened it. The first thing she saw was the photograph, the clear, sharp, undeniable image of her and Mark in a compromising position outside the downtown hotel, taken just hours earlier. The color drained completely from her face. Her legs wobbled, and for a moment I thought she was going to fall. What is this? She whispered, though we both knew exactly what it was. Keep looking, I said calmly. There's more. With trembling fingers, Chloe pulled out the next document, a certified copy of the marriage record between Karen Vance and Robert Smith, dated 2 years before her wedding to Daniel. Mark had shot up from his chair, his face a mask of panic. Daniel was looking back and forth between the photo and his wife, trying to process what he was seeing. Chloe, Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. What is this? But Chloe didn't answer. She was staring at the third document. The police report from Nevada, identifying her as Karen Vance, wanted for marriage fraud. That's when she collapsed. It wasn't an elegant faint like in the movies. It was a complete, total, devastating breakdown. Her body folded in on itself as if she'd been physically struck, and she fell to her knees on the dining room floor. The guests jumped back, some of them screaming. Mark rushed toward her, but stopped when Daniel looked at him with an expression I had never seen on my son before. Don't you go near her, Daniel said, his voice dangerously low. Don't you go near my wife. Daniel, buddy, I can explain, Mark began. Explain what? Daniel's hand was shaking as he held it up. Explain why my best friend is sleeping with my wife. Explain why my wife apparently has another name and another husband. Chloe was sobbing on the floor, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic from a woman who knew her carefully constructed world had just collapsed. There are more documents in the envelope, I said softly, addressing Daniel. A lot more. Daniel emptied the contents of the envelope onto the dining room table. Bank records, additional photographs, police reports, all spread out in front of the guests who had come to celebrate his success. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 people staring at the evidence of a betrayal so complete, so devastating that no one knew what to say. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice broken but firm. I want everyone to leave. Now. The guests didn't need to be told twice. They got up and filed out in silence, some mumbling apologies, others just fleeing the awkwardness. Mark was the last to move. He approached Daniel with his hands outstretched, pleading. Daniel, please let me explain. Things got complicated, but we never meant to hurt you. My son looked at him with a coldness that surprised me. Get out of my house, he said calmly, and if I ever see you near my family again, I will call the police. Mark glanced at Chloe, who was still sobbing on the floor, then at me. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there that chilled my blood. It wasn't remorse. It was a threat. After Mark left, Daniel knelt beside Chloe, not to comfort her, but to talk. How much of this is true? He asked. Chloe lifted her head, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw her true face, without the mask of the perfect wife, without the act of the grateful daughter-in-law. It was the face of Karen Vance, the professional con artist. All of it, she whispered. All of it is true. And with those 4 words, my son's marriage came to an end. The days following the dinner party were like watching a building crumble in slow motion. Chloe, or Karen, as we now knew was her real name, didn't get up from the dining room floor for nearly an hour after the guests left. She stayed there, sobbing, shaking, occasionally muttering incoherently about how everything had gone wrong. Daniel had sat in his chair, staring at the documents scattered across the table. He hadn't yelled, hadn't exploded in fury, as I had expected. Instead, there was a stillness about him that scared me more than any outburst of rage. "Mom," he had finally said, his voice barely audible, "how long have you known this?" The question pierced me like an arrow. 6 weeks, I admitted. I started suspecting 2 months ago, but I didn't have proof until 6 weeks ago. He nodded slowly, as if processing every word. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I knew she would find a way to make you doubt me," I answered honestly, "and because I needed to be absolutely sure." That night, Daniel stayed up until 4 a.m, reading every document, verifying every detail. Karen had gone up to the master bedroom and hadn't come out since. I could hear her occasional sobs through the walls, but they no longer sounded like remorse. They sounded like self-pity. The next day, Daniel hired a lawyer. Margaret Thompson was a stern woman in her 60s who specialized in complicated divorces and marriage fraud. When Daniel showed her all the evidence Samuel had gathered, her eyes lit up with the satisfaction of a predator who had found easy prey. "This is more than enough," she told Daniel during their first meeting. "The marriage is void due to bigamy. She has no claim to any marital property. In fact, we could sue her for the $250,000 she stole." But Daniel was too good for his own good, even after everything he had discovered. "I just want her gone," he told me that night. "I want her out of our lives forever." Karen had been locked in the bedroom for 3 days when she finally came downstairs. She looked awful. Puffy eyes, disheveled hair, wearing the same clothes from the night of the dinner party. But when she saw me in the kitchen, something in her eyes changed. The desperation transformed into something more dangerous. "This is your fault," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "You destroyed my life." I turned slowly to face her. "I didn't destroy anything, Karen. You built your life on lies, and lies always collapse eventually." Her face twisted with fury. "My name is Chloe. I'm Chloe Miller. I've been a part of this family for 7 years." "Your name is Karen Vance," I replied calmly. "And you were never a part of this family. You were a parasite feeding on it." That's when she attacked me. She lunged at me with her nails out, screaming obscenities. For a moment, I feared for my life, but Daniel appeared in the kitchen just in time, grabbing her by the arms and holding her away from me. "Let go of me," Karen screamed. "This old hag ruined everything I worked for." "What you worked for," Daniel said, his voice as cold as ice, "was to steal my life." That was the first time I saw my son truly angry. Not the explosive fury, but something deeper and more controlled. Karen must have seen something in his eyes too, because she stopped struggling and collapsed against him, sobbing. "Daniel, please," she begged. "I know I made mistakes, but I love you. I really do. We can get through this." Daniel pushed her away from him, as if she were something unclean. "You don't know what love is, Karen. You only know how to manipulate it." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal activity. Margaret Thompson had started the annulment process, frozen their joint bank accounts, and filed a civil suit for the stolen funds. Karen had hired her own lawyer, a nervous man who clearly realized he had an impossible case to win. But Karen had one last ace up her sleeve. A week after the confrontation in the kitchen, the police arrived. 2 serious officers who asked to speak with me about certain allegations. Karen had filed a complaint, claiming that I had been harassing and threatening her, and that I had forged evidence against her. She claimed the photographs had been digitally manipulated and that the documents about her past were malicious fabrications. "She's a resentful old woman who never accepted me," she had told the police, according to Detective Johnson. "She's trying to destroy my marriage because she's jealous of my relationship with her son." Fortunately, Samuel Jones had anticipated this possibility. He had certified copies of all the documents, testimony from his sources in Nevada, and forensic evidence that the photographs had not been altered. The police investigation lasted exactly 3 days before they dismissed Karen's allegations as false, but the damage to her credibility was devastating. Her own lawyer quit after discovering she had lied to him as well about several aspects of her case. That's when Mark reappeared. He had been hiding for 2 weeks, probably hoping everything would blow over. But when he realized Karen was losing, he decided to save his own skin. He showed up at Margaret Thompson's office with his own lawyer, offering to testify against Karen in exchange for immunity. He had detailed records of all the financial transfers, copies of text messages, and evidence of other schemes they had been running together. Mark was smart, Margaret explained to me after the meeting. He realized Karen would sink him with her if he didn't act first. His testimony completely seals the case. Karen found out about Mark's betrayal that same afternoon. Her reaction was spectacular, even for her standards. She showed up at the house screaming, breaking things, threatening to tell the truth about everyone. "Mark and I were a team," she shrieked as Daniel called the police. "If I'm going down, he's coming with me. And you too, Daniel. You're all going to pay." But her threats were empty. Without Mark as an ally, with no money for decent lawyers, and with all the evidence against her, Karen had no power to hurt anyone else. The police arrested her that night for violating a restraining order Daniel had obtained days earlier. She spent 3 days in jail before she could make bail. When she got out, she had changed. She was no longer the furious, desperate woman from before. She was something more dangerous. A woman who had accepted she had lost everything and now only wanted to cause as much damage as possible. "This isn't over," she told me when she came to collect her things under police supervision. "You may have won this battle, Rebecca, but I know things about this family that could destroy you all." I looked her straight in the eye. "You have no more power here, Karen. You can't hurt my family anymore." She smiled, but there was no joy in the expression. "We'll see." 3 days later, Karen Vance disappeared. She packed her most valuable belongings during the night and simply vanished. She left no forwarding address. She didn't say where she was going. One day, she was there. The next, she was gone, as if she had never existed. Daniel found a note in the master bedroom. "This isn't over. I'll be back when you least expect it." But I knew she wouldn't be back. Karen was a predator, and predators always look for easy prey. Daniel was no longer easy prey. He was no longer the naive man he had been when she met him. Mark didn't stick around either. After testifying against Karen, he sold his house and moved to another state. He had lost not only his accomplice, but also the best friend he had betrayed for years. For the first time in 7 years, the house was peaceful. There was no more tension, no more walking on eggshells, no more pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Daniel had lost a wife and a best friend, but he had gained something more valuable: the truth. And after living in lies for so long, the truth felt like freedom. But I knew the real healing was just beginning. 6 months after Karen disappeared, Daniel and I were sitting in the backyard, enjoying morning coffee in a comfortable silence we hadn't shared in years. The lawn was green and manicured. The flowers I had planted were blooming without the constant tension that had dominated the house for so long. "Mom," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence, "I never properly thanked you for what you did." I set my cup down and looked at him. My son had changed over these months. The stress lines around his eyes had softened. He had regained weight I hadn't realized he'd lost. And for the first time in years, he seemed truly at peace. "You don't need to thank me for protecting my family," I told him. "But I do need to apologize," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "For 7 years, I let Chloe treat you horribly. I watched you serve, clean, endure her humiliations, and I did nothing to stop it." A lump formed in my throat. "You were in love, Daniel, or you thought you were." "No," he said firmly. "That's no excuse. You're my mother. You raised me by yourself after Dad died. You worked 2 jobs to put me through college. You sacrificed everything for me. And I let a stranger treat you like you were invisible in your own home." Tears started to roll down my cheeks. We had had many conversations over these months, but this was the first time Daniel had truly confronted his role in everything that had happened. "For years I wondered why you didn't defend me," I admitted, "why you never saw what Chloe was doing to me. I started to think that maybe there was something wrong with me." Daniel closed his eyes, the pain evident on his face. "God, Mom, Chloe was so good at manipulating me. Every time I noticed something, she had an explanation. She'd say you were being difficult, that you were jealous of our relationship, that you needed boundaries because you were too demanding." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her," he admitted. "It was easier to believe the problem was you than to face the possibility that my perfect wife was a liar." We sat in silence for a few minutes, processing years of pain and misunderstanding. "Do you know what hurt the most?" I finally asked him. Daniel shook his head. "That after everything I sacrificed for you, after all the years I cared for you and loved you unconditionally, you chose to believe a woman you had known for only a few years instead of trusting the mother who had been there your whole life." Daniel got up from his chair and knelt beside mine, taking my hands in his. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking. "And there's no excuse for that. But I want you to know that I will never, ever let anyone treat you that way again. And I will never again doubt you when you tell me something is wrong." I hugged him then, feeling as if I was getting my son back after years of having lost him to a stranger. The following weeks brought more revelations. Margaret Thompson had managed to recover $180,000 of the funds that Karen and Mark had stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was significant. Daniel used some of that money to remodel the house, removing all traces of Karen's reign. "I want this to be your house again, Mom," he told me, as workers stripped the wallpaper Karen had chosen. "I want you to feel welcome here again." He also insisted on giving me the $40,000 I had saved for Karen. "That money is yours," he said when I protested. "You saved it from your own pension, and I want you to use it for yourself. Travel, hobbies, whatever makes you happy." For the first time in decades, I had money that was completely mine. Not for the family, not for emergencies, but just for me. I decided to use it for things Karen had never allowed. I redecorated my room, bought books, and even signed up for painting classes at the community center. The biggest transformation, however, was in Daniel himself. Without Karen constantly manipulating him, my son began to rediscover who he really was. He started cooking again, something he had loved, but that Karen had constantly criticized. He renewed his hobby of photography. He even started hanging out with friends that Karen had managed to subtly push away over the years. "I feel like I'm waking up from a very long dream," he told me one night, "a dream where I wasn't myself." But the real test of our healing came when Daniel started dating someone new. Sarah was a 42-year-old nurse, divorced, with 2 teenage children. She was the opposite of Karen in every way. practical instead of glamorous, honest instead of manipulative, genuinely kind instead of calculatingly charming. The first time Daniel asked me what I thought of her, my heart stopped. For years, I had learned to keep my opinions to myself, to smile and nod no matter what I really felt. "I want your honest opinion, Mom," he said. "If there's something you don't like about Sarah, I need to know. I'm never going to ignore your gut feeling about people again." "I like her," I told him, and it was completely true. She's genuine. She's not putting on a show to impress you. And most importantly, she treats you with real respect, not that fake admiration Karen used to manipulate you. Daniel smiled. That's exactly what I thought. Sarah started coming over for Sunday dinners, sometimes bringing her kids. It was wonderful to have children in the house again, filling the spaces that had been silent for so long. And Sarah always insisted on helping with the cooking, treating me as an equal instead of as the invisible servant. "Mrs. Miller," she told me one afternoon as we washed dishes together, "Daniel told me what happened with his ex-wife. I want you to know that I completely respect the place you have in his life. This is your house, your family. I'm just a guest." I felt tears in my eyes. "Call me Rebecca," I told her, "and you're not a guest. If Daniel is happy with you, then you are welcome here." A year after Karen disappeared, we received news of her one last time. She had been arrested in Florida under another name, accused of scamming a man in his 80s. Apparently, she had gone back to her old tricks, but this time she had chosen the wrong victim, a retired detective who had seen through her lies immediately. "Do you feel anything for her?" Daniel asked me when we saw the news. I thought about it for a moment. "Pity," I admitted finally. "Pity for someone who never learned that real relationships based on real love are far more valuable than anything you can steal or manipulate." Daniel nodded. "I feel the same," he said, "and relief that she's so far away from us." Mark had also been arrested in Nevada on charges related to his past scams. Apparently, his testimony against Karen hadn't been enough to protect him from his own crimes. The last I heard of him, he was serving a 5-year prison sentence. In the second year after Karen left, Daniel and Sarah got engaged. This time, Daniel asked for my blessing before he proposed. "Are you sure this is the right thing?" I asked, not because I doubted Sarah, but because I wanted to be sure Daniel was making the decision for the right reasons. "I'm sure," he said, "but I'm doing things differently this time. No big ceremony, no trying to impress anyone, just close family, people who actually love us." Daniel and Sarah's wedding was everything his first wedding had not been: intimate, sincere, and filled with real love instead of spectacle. They asked me to walk Daniel down the aisle, officially acknowledging the role I had in his life. "You're the most important woman in my life," he told me as we walked, "and I want Sarah and everyone else to know that." Now, 3 years after all this began, I'm sitting in the same garden where Daniel and I had that crucial conversation, but I'm not alone. Sarah is beside me, teaching me how to use a tablet to see photos of her kids in college. Daniel is in the kitchen, making lunch for all of us, singing softly as he cooks. The house is full of real life again. Not the fake, perfect life that Karen had created, but the messy, imperfect, yet genuinely happy life of a real family. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never found the courage to expose Karen. If I had stayed silent, enduring her humiliations, watching my son be manipulated and robbed without doing anything. But it doesn't matter anymore. I made the right decision at the right time. I protected my family the only way I knew how, with patience, with evidence, and with the truth. And now, for the first time in years, We are all where we belong.